Hi, I'm Bill Bradley. Join me for a recent excerpt of American Voices. Here on American Voices, we celebrate all that this country has to offer. So after hearing about people's life stories, we also want to celebrate the land. So each week we invite authors and artists to talk about a favorite place in the country. This time, Dorothy Berry is back. She's the Digital Collections Manager at Houghton Library at Harvard University. Here's Dorothy Berry.
My name is Dorothy Berry, and my favorite sound is my old dog Rusty howling at the train that goes through the town where I grew up. It was always interesting to come home from college because I grew up in a town with 1,500 people in the Ozarks in southwest Missouri, and I went to college in Oakland, California. So it was coming back to an entirely different world that was much more quiet and fewer people and full of animals. The train is actually not that close by to the house, but because of the geography and the way sound carries, when it goes through, it sounds like it's much closer. But for the dogs, especially for Rusty, when it would go by, it's probably much louder with their sensitive ears. And when the trains would ring their bells or make their train sounds, the dog would sort of howl around in a maybe approximation of harmony, but not quite. But it always seemed uncontrollable. It kind of breaks out of the dogs, and you look at his face, and even if you're sitting on the porch calmly petting them, there comes a point where the train sort of makes them howl. There's nothing you could do about it. Can't put little earmuffs on them or anything, but it's just not fair, and she didn't like it. I think of it as a favorite sound because the train going through that town and sort of sitting on the porch with the animals, and it's calm, and even though there's a howling in the train, for me, there's a certain calm there, is very, very resonant with my memories of home, of being there. I grew up in a small town. I've lived in cities all of my adulthood, and it's never that quiet in a city. And so I think that sound sticks out to me because it's just a clear clarion of being in that space. That's a very comforting space. So my parents live in the house that my great grandparents built in 1873 after they were emancipated from slavery, and the house has been in our family ever since then. They still live there. My great-great-great-grandparents, Caroline Boone Berry and William Berry, were married, and they had all of this land. Caroline Boone, she was the granddaughter of Daniel Boone, the famous American frontiersman. I always assumed her father gave them the money, maybe, or gave them the land, father and former enslaver. But so at this point in the 1870s, they were actually pretty successful and wealthy farmers. And so they bought this land. They built a house in 1872 when it burnt down. And then they built a house in 1873. And that house, with different additions over the years, has been in my family ever since. And we've always had family folks living there. That farm is a century farm, I think, with the Missouri Historical Society, and there's a cemetery in the back that's a National Historic Site, a cemetery for enslaved people and Native Americans and paupers who couldn't be buried in the town cemetery. Since my family owned that land, they dedicated that cemetery space to the people who were not allowed to be buried in the town cemetery, like a lot of small towns. And so my family had the cemetery that African Americans were buried in. A lot of them were formerly enslaved, but I do know that sometimes people from some different tribal groups have come to our house and asked if they can go to the cemetery because they had relatives buried there, and we, of course, let everybody go there if they'd like to. My nostalgia is almost entirely tied to the house. I have very few nostalgia feelings around Southwest Missouri as a place. I didn't fit in when I was growing up. I was always real different, and I definitely felt freed moving to cities, but I am very close to my family. And so I always think of that very much as home. I'm going back to visit my folks for the first time since the pandemic in a few weeks, and I'm so excited to see my parents, my older brother. This pandemic time was very tough on my family because my dad got sick unrelated to COVID, but we couldn't go visit because of this was earlier in the pandemic. So he has diabetes and he had an injury on his leg and he had to get his leg amputated. This was at the point at which no one is visiting anyone and the hospitals are so locked down. My mom was having a difficult time, as anybody would. And it was so nice because at least Rusty, the dog, was there sort of to be a friend and comforting during this really difficult time. And then, a few weeks after my dad's surgery, the dog passes away. And it really, for me, felt like the next time I go home, it's going to be really different. My dad will be in a wheelchair. This dog that we love won't be there. So that probably leans into why it's such a nostalgic feeling, because it's, especially right now, since I haven't been able to visit them yet, it's sort of like the last things I remember of that feeling the family is whole. I think it just felt unstable during this pandemic because it's, with my dad getting really ill. At any other time, I would have flown out there. My brother would have flown. It would have been sort of, you take time off work and you go and you do this. And it just wasn't a thing that could be done. But now it's been enough time and we all are more adjusted to the new situations. My parents are thinking about getting another dog now. And so it feels like we're back to the new way things will be.
That's Dorothy Berry. She's the Digital Collections Program Manager at Houghton Library at Harvard University.
It's family. It's family.
Thank you for listening to American Voices here on my YouTube channel. For more interviews celebrating the goodness and creativity of the American people, click the subscribe button below.